When I start part hunting for a PC, even a budget one, I try to maintain a few standards for the components I'm looking at. With PSUs, there can't be any ketchup and mustard cables. For PC cases, in addition to actual quality features like good airflow, multiple storage mounts, etc., I wanted to have a glass side panel so I can see the insides. Luckily, it seems more and more budget cases are including glass over acrylic or even a solid side panel, and this is really fantastic. Today I'm going to be talking about a PC case that is cheap enough to be on your radar if you're a budget builder, and it has a glass side panel to boot. Welcome to the Middle of Nowhere. This PC case right here is the DeepCool Matrexx 40. It's an mATX case with a PSU shroud in the basement. It comes included with one 3-pin /Molex fan, and of course, it has a glass side panel. The Matrexx 40 first became available for purchase in March of 2021, and its MSRP is around $64.99. However, at the time of this video, it's currently priced at $51 before taxes and shipping. The question now becomes, does this case at the $51 price point offer enough value in terms of features for the budget PC builder? Let's find out. The Matrexx 40 is made from a mixture of ABS plastic, SPCC steel, and of course, the glass side panel. It is an mATX case, so it will be smaller than your standard mid-tower PC case, and it measures 400mm deep, 215mm wide, and 430mm tall. As a reminder, because it is an mATX case, you'll only be able to fit mATX or ITX motherboards in it. So if you purchase an ATX motherboard and you're looking for cases, you'll have to look elsewhere. The glass and back side panel are held by captive thumb screws, which is great. Do be careful though not to loosen the thumb screws too much, as they may actually come out of their holes. It's nice to see the glass panel held on this way, as most budget cases with glass that I've encountered tend to use the old holes in the glass with screws method, like those found on Corsair's 175 and 275R, as well as Cougar's MX330G. The front panel is made from plastic. It has a neat design with intermittent solid and perforated sections, reminiscent of Pixels or maybe Tetris or maybe a waterfall, I don't know. Anyway, it looks pretty cool. This design should allow for a decent amount of front airflow. You can remove the front panel by grabbing it from the bottom and pulling away. Removing it does take some effort, so beware of that. Additionally, this panel is rather flimsy, so definitely don't put too much stress on it when removing it. There is an attached filter that is not removable, so to clean it, you'll need to remove the entire front panel. Thankfully, the front I/O isn't attached to the front panel, which is another feature I try to make sure any case I'm looking at has as well. The rear side panel slides on and off easily when no cables are present to push against it. Since there is no outdent for cable management, be sure to tuck all your cables away nice and neat so you can easily reattach the panel. This will ensure you don't cause any strain against the panel, which may make it harder to reattach and also cause it to bulge. The panel is thin and there is some flex to it, but nothing you should be too concerned about. The glass side panel runs the full height of the case and is 5mm thick. It's framed by a black border so you won't see the naked case on the other side of it. Two sides also have metal attachments glued to it to help secure it to the case itself. There's also a decent tint to the panel, but it's not nearly as dark as the tinting on the Corsair Carbide 175R, so if you don't have any RGB components, you should still be able to see the guts of your PC pretty easily. The case itself is pretty rigid, even with the panels off. The entire case is held together, mostly with rivets, but there are some screws, so modders do be aware should you want to mod it. While the case as a whole is rather rigid, some of the sheeting where you would attach fans or even the PSU shroud itself is very thin, and you can definitely push on it, so be careful and don't put your full weight on these areas. The Matrexx 40's front I/O consists of a power button and a reset button, one USB 2.0 port, one USB 3.2 Gen 1 port, and a combo mic headphone jack. There's also a hard drive activity light. The power and reset buttons are springy rather than clicky, and I'm not a huge fan. I definitely prefer the stiffer, clicky style of button found in other cases I've looked at. Since this case was released in 2021, I find it rather odd a USB 2.0 port is even included. I'd much rather see two USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports instead. As for a Type-C port, while I would love one, I definitely don't expect it in a case at this price point. But again, as I've said before, I don't think Type-C should be reserved for luxury cases. There are a total of 3 dust filters included with the Matrexx 40. As previously mentioned, there's the one attached to the front panel, and then there's one at the top held on by magnets, and the third is at the bottom, which is held on by metal outsets or little teeth. It's not the easiest to remove or reinsert, and is definitely less elegant than the solution employed by Corsair or Phanteks with their 175R or P360 cases respectively. I get the Matrexx 40 is a budget case, but at its original $65 price point, the bottom filter should definitely be better and easier to remove. The 4 case feet are typical rectangles I've seen in other budget cases, and they're attached by a single Phillips head screw. 2 little plastic nubs jut into the case frame to keep the feet from twisting or turning. This is a nice touch. There are no rubber or foam pads on the case to help keep it from sliding, scratching your desk surface, or to dampen vibrations, which is both surprising and disappointing. You could easily buy and cut to size some sticky pads for the feet if you feel so inclined. While this absence of foam or rubber padding on the feet is definitely a negative, at least they're easy to remove should you want to replace them or mod them. As the Matrexx 40 is an mATX case, you'll only be able to install micro-ATX or ITX motherboards. The standoffs are all pre-installed, and you may need to remove 1 or 2 depending on your motherboard's layout. If you use an ITX or Asus's Mini DTX motherboard, you'll definitely need to remove some standoffs. You don't want to leave unused standoffs in the case as it could cause a short. The Matrexx 40 supports up to 4 storage devices. You can install 2 2.5-inch SSDs on the side of the case, and then there's a hard drive cage at the bottom of the case where you can install 2 3.5-inch hard drives or 1 2.5-inch and 1 3.5-inch drive. There are 0 rubber grommets on the cage to help dampen vibrations, and I find this to be a shame. These don't cost much and help keep noise down and keep vibrations from causing any damage to a spinning hard drive. This is just another sacrifice one has to consider when going with a budget case. One nice feature is the hard drive cage is not only easy to remove, but you can adjust its position and move it forward to accommodate longer power supplies. The cage is secured by 2 Phillips head screws. Simply remove these and then slide the cage out of the case if you're not using it, or adjust it to a different position. I definitely recommend removing the cage to install your storage device. Also of note, the screws for 2.5-inch SSDs are the same as the motherboard screws, and there are 18 included, so plenty for a couple of SSDs and the motherboard. 3.5-inch drives use the screws with the flat Phillips head. Should you buy this case, you'll need to take into account the dimensions of your CPU cooler, GPU length, and PSU length. The Matrexx 40 supports CPU coolers up to 165mm, which is really good. This means you can easily use a Vetru V5 at 148mm, a Cooler Master Hyper 212 at 159mm, and the beefy Noctua NH D15S at 165mm. It'll just fit. Also, the motherboard tray has a generous cutout so you can easily access the CPU backplate for CPU cooler installation or adjustment. You can fit GPUs up to 320mm in length, which means theoretically you could fit in an EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra RTX 3080 Ti into this case, as it only measures 300mm. But you might not have much room for the fans to breathe, as it is a 3-slot GPU. It's important to not only take the GPU length into account, but also how many slots it takes when using an mATX case. You want to make sure there's enough room for the fans to breathe. Speaking of slots, the PCI covers are the kind you have to bend back and forth to remove, and then you can't reuse them. These one-use covers aren't a surprise considering the current $51 price point, but if the Matrexx 40 was still priced at its original $65 MSRP, I'd be a bit more irritated. Luckily, PCI slot covers are pretty cheap should you need to replace any. When it comes to PSUs, you can install ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 160mm. If you don't get a semi or fully modular power supply and aren't using the drive cage, I definitely recommend removing it so you have more room to stuff your excess cables. If you use only one 3.5-inch hard drive, then put it in the lower part of the cage so excess cables can go over it. Installing the PSU is pretty straightforward, just slide it in and screw it down. The Matrexx 40 supports a mixture of 120mm and 140mm fans. It comes with 120mm fan pre-installed at the back, and it's a 3-pin or Molex fan, and not PWM unfortunately. You can install 3 120mm fans at the front and 2 at the top of the case. If you want to use 140mm fans, you can install 2 at the front and 2 at the top. The rear only supports 120mm fans. I definitely recommend buying at least one additional fan when building in this case. If you need to save money and don't care about RGB, I recommend Arctic's P12 PWM fans. They're 120mm, quiet and inexpensive, with a 5-pack costing around $31 or a single fan costing around $8. If you want ARGB fans, Phanteks PH-F120SK DRGB fans are also really good. A 3-pack of these 120mm ARGB fans will run you around $35, and a single fan costs around $13. I've used both fans in PC builds and really like them. Regarding the top mounting points for the fans, they are centered and not offset, so do be aware of that when using tall RAM or a large CPU cooler, as it is possible you could run into issues installing them or routing cables. Should you want to liquid cool your PC with an AIO, you can install one at the top or back of the case. There is no support, it seems, for the front. You can fit a 120, 140, 240, or 280mm AIO at the top and 120mm AIO at the back of the case. While the product specifications for the Matrix 40 says there isn't support for an AIO at the front, there's definitely room. The PSU shroud has a cutout, so you could in theory fit a radiator plus fans there. There's a little over 60mm of space here as well, so unless your GPU is super long, I can't see it being a problem really. If you have a 240 or 280mm AIO, it might be worth exploring trying to install it at the front. If you remove the hard drive cage, you could possibly even install 360mm radiator here. If you're attempting a custom loop in this case, you might have an easy time installing a pump res combo at the front against the fans, provided your GPU isn't super long, and then a radiator at the top. This assumes the CPU only loop, as you'll definitely want a second radiator if you intend to water cool both a CPU and GPU. As with most budget cases, there are no grommets with the Matrix 40 to help conceal your cables. However, there are plenty of holes to route them, and they're generously sized to push through even the bulkiest of cables. When it comes to tucking away your cables, there is 20mm of clearance from the back of the tray to the case frame. There should be plenty of space, but definitely take this depth into account when bunching your cables together. To hold your cables down, you'll be able to make use of the many cable tie-down points spread all over the back of the case. They are well positioned and will definitely help you contain the mess when building in the Matrix 40. Finally, we come to the accessories included with the DeepCool Matrix 40. You'll find them wrapped around the front I/O cables, and included in 2 reusable plastic bags are the following: a bunch of cable ties, enough screws for installing your motherboard, hard drives, fans, and your power supply, and a user manual. It's made from glossy paper, and while it's all black and white, it's fairly easy to read. The manual is very detailed in terms of what is included with the case and instructions on how to remove the various panels, the hard drive cage, and how to install hard drives and SSDs and other bits of information about the case. Overall, the included accessories are pretty good. I'm happy to see reusable bags included instead of one-use ones. The manual is also easy to follow. Really, the only thing I'd like to see is a motherboard standoff removal tool, like the one found in Cooler Master's Half XP Evo. If you don't have one, use a hex socket that fits over the standoff. It's essentially the same thing. What do you think of DeepCool's Matrix 40? It's stylish with its unique front panel design and tinted glass side panel. While it does lack some features I want, really basic things like vibration dampers for storage drives, padding on the case feet, and reusable PCI slot covers, it doesn't lack any necessary features that would make this a bad case to build your PC in. There's plenty of storage support, fan mounting points for good airflow, the cable management is good, and the front I/O is alright. The current $51 asking price also makes this case a really tempting value proposition. The only other pitfall I can see with this case, besides those absent features already mentioned, are the lack of more fans. Adding fans is an additional cost no matter how you look at it, and you'll want to at least add 1 or 2 more fans for better airflow and cooling performance. Doing so will tack on an additional $16 to $26 if you use the fans I recommended. When you take that extra cost into account, the new price for this case is around $67 to $77, so it might be worth looking at cases at that price range and see what features they provide, as you might find one that has cable grommets, more storage support, reusable PCI covers, as well as more fans. Having said that, if you're planning on building a budget PC and do not intend to get more than 1 additional fan or already have some on hand, then this case is definitely worth looking at. And that's all I have to say about that. What do you think of the DeepCool Matrix 40? Have you used this case before? If so, what's your experience been like? Do you love it or hate it? Do you have any recommendations for other budget cases? Let me know in the comments section. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, hit that like button and share any questions or comments you might have. I'd love to hear from you. You can show your support for the channel by clicking subscribe, and don't forget to click that notification icon so you don't miss out on any future content. And hey, while you're here, why don't you check out some of the other videos I've made. I'm Seth, and I'll see you next time in the middle of nowhere.